Hello, you're listening to Hold On a Minute, a podcast by UNFPA Asia and the Pacific. This podcast series presents inspiring and powerful stories on the sexual and reproductive health and rights of women across the Asia-Pacific region. I'm Pupei Chawarat-Yong Jiranon, your host. On this episode of Hold On a Minute by UNFPA Asia-Pacific, Redesigning the World for Women, we shine the light on the importance of gender equality and investing in women. Despite the advancements made in the fields of science, technology, and finance, benefits from the rapid progress have not been equitable. The world continues to fall short when it comes to women's safety, health, and well-being. Women are the backbone of families and communities. Communities and countries can only flourish when all women and girls are empowered to have access to gender-equitable services, particularly in healthcare and education. As it stands, the world is not designed for women. So UNFPA Asia and the Pacific is calling for everyone to redesign the world together with gender inclusivity in mind, with the launch of the Equity 2030 Alliance initiative in the Asia-Pacific region.
A famous designer once said, "You cannot understand good design if you don't understand people." So, people should wear jeans with pockets that fit their phones, a phone that fits your hand and that actually understands you.
I have really painful periods.
Sorry, what did you say?
You see, it turns out designs for the masses were made with only a few of us in mind. New tech is biased, producing false diagnosis and treatment recommendations. That's why women take medication that hasn't been developed for them, and as a result, are twice as likely to experience adverse reactions to them. Many women wait 4 years longer than men to be diagnosed with hundreds of diseases. For every woman diagnosed with a female-specific condition, 4 go undiagnosed. Attire for women in healthcare doesn't match their needs, putting them at risk every day performing surgery with instruments designed for men, and eventually having to perform CPR, a skill for which they trained on a male mannequin. Meanwhile, more suitable treatments are not being developed because only 1% of research and development funding goes to women-centric solutions. There are 4 billion reasons to reimagine a world where gender differences are respected equitably. The world is not designed for women. Let's redesign the world.
To learn more about Equity 2030 Alliance and how it relates to the Asia-Pacific region, I'm honored to have with me the UNFPA Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific, Mr. P.O. Smith. In his role, Mr. Smith oversees UNFPA's work in 36 countries across the region. Prior to this appointment, he was the Chief of Staff of UNFPA, providing strategic, political, and operational leadership and oversight, a role he had held since 2018. During his 18-year career with the United Nations, he has held key positions that include Special Assistant to 2 UN Deputy Secretary Generals and as the Chief of Staff to the Secretary General's Special Advisor on post-2015 development planning. The world is not designed for women. Let's redesign the world. That's a powerful statement from UNFPA and an important one as we celebrate International Women's Day today. Can you explain further to us, me specifically, about why the world is not designed for women?
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm so happy to join this podcast. When we talk about the world not being designed for women, what we're talking about is really, there's been centuries-old patriarchal system that has shaped, in many respects, where we are today. And so we're trying to undo that. There's been a lot of progress when it comes to gender equality and women's empowerment, but not enough. There's a lot of hurdles that still, women and girls face across the world, north and south. And that's why this International Women's Day is very important, because we're talking about how do you invest more in women and girls? How do you accelerate progress? The world has 8 billion in its population, and half of that are women. And yet the world still fails women when it comes to their safety, to their health, to their well-being. Look at the progress in research and in development, including technological innovations. It's growing at an exponential pace, but the benefits are not equitable to all. And unfortunately, when it comes to science and technology in the research and development process, particularly look at healthcare, the evidence tells us that there is a lack of gender equity. So, for example, 80% of clinical trials lack representation of women. So what does that mean? Well, that results in increased adverse side effects among women, and it takes 4 years longer to diagnose more than 700 health conditions in women when compared to men. But it's not only in the space of research and development. Many aspects of the world, should it be in urban infrastructure to workplace policies, they've been historically designed with a very male-centric perspective. And very often that has disregarded the diverse needs and the experiences of women and girls. Take a look at the traditional workplace. Now, very often the norms and the policies that shape those workplaces today across the world, they still do often disadvantage women, especially mothers, young working families who are trying to get a head start on life. And it fails them because it fails to accommodate their career aspirations that they want to be able to match simultaneous to their own family aspirations. Also look around at the decision-making positions across various sectors in the world. And again, women, girls, they're underrepresented. And what does that mean? That means that you have policies, your products that don't adequately reflect their perspectives or indeed, more importantly, address their needs. And that's why UNFPA is calling for all partners to come together and to redesign the world with gender inclusivity in mind. And that's what we call our Equity 2030 Alliance. And we're so pleased to be launching it in terms of the Asia Pacific chapter this month. As it stands, the world is not designed for women, so we have to redesign the world, and that has to start today.
I think as a woman in this region, it's kind of sad that I myself, I've heard of these types of research coming out, but in actuality, we're not really aware of it in terms of how the design of the world is not suited for women. So with this Equity 2030 Alliance, what can we expect from it, and why is it important?
You're absolutely right. There are many of us that haven't heard about some of these shocking statistics and findings that we're seeing. And that's what Equity 2030 Alliance is all about. It's a global initiative that we have at UNFPA. We're extremely proud of it. And really at the root of it, it's about advancing gender equity, particularly in the areas of science and technology and in finance. And we've given ourselves a deadline, 2030. Now, I know that's a very short time away, but it matches also to the global deadline that we have for our global development goals, our sustainable development goals that unites all the member states of the United Nations around areas of progress, should it be in social, in environmental, or in economic areas. The evidence that you touched on, that suggests that the design and the development of science, technology, and financial solutions, it very often lacks that gender equity across industries. I'm very much focused on healthcare and on well-being and on education. So we're working at all levels to bring together experts from, should it be business, academia, from our government partners, because we want to raise awareness and advocate the need for policies that are more gender equitable, for approaches, solutions that are more gender equitable. So through the Equity 2030 Alliance, we're going to be accelerating actions that normalize gender equity in science and in technology. And how do we do that? Well, we're going to try to introduce data-driven arguments, like I mentioned before, about how women experience disparities in healthcare access and in treatment, such as medical research and practices that historically have prioritized male bodies and male symptoms. And that leads to misdiagnoses and inadequate care for women. let me tell you another statistic that you might not have heard yet, and which I, recently learned, which is, of course, again, disappointing as it is shocking. Science, medicine, and engineering traditionally have taken a young Caucasian male averaging around 70 to 80 kilos as the norm. So we have to really stop this. And what we're trying to do through this alliance, it's not a favor to women and girls. This is their right. If it's good enough for men, it's good enough for women, and we have to right this wrong that has shaped so much of science and technology for too long. And so the alliance is, it's about mobilizing these influencers, but it's also very importantly looking at resources. You need the resources, the expertise that are going to amplify these issues. We want to multiply the global power of our members to try and disrupt the current status quo, and to try and build, gender transformative solutions. Why is it that a 16-year-old girl is not interested in technology as a career? Why is it that, lecture halls in universities that are teaching science, they have fewer women? These are the kind of issues that we want to address through this Equity 2030 Alliance. We're going to talk to teachers, to academia, and understand what are some of these barriers that still mean girls don't see themselves reflected, and how can they play a role along with us at UNFPA to try and break those barriers and try to inspire young women and girls to enter into this field. We're very excited, as you can tell. We have a dedicated website for our Equity 2030 Alliance, and I encourage all of our listeners to visit it at unfpa.org and see how you can be part of the global action that is needed to redesign our world.
Well, this initiative obviously is not just great, it's important. I think listeners who may be women or, men who care about women may be alarmed by what you just said in terms of just take medical care, the safety issues of how women may face the risks of being misdiagnosed more than men. So when we take a look at the initiative that mobilizes the big players in the world, from governments to businesses to commit to gender equity, we've seen at the same time the increased investments and attention towards gender equity in the space of science and technology. That's why I think one of the things when I read or went through our talk that we were preparing for today was that it is alarming that in this day and age, this is still an issue, that women and girls still face barriers in exercising their rights and choices, particularly across this region. Why is this so?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so today I'm speaking to you from Bangkok, and I'm, as you know, the regional director for UNFPA in Asia and the Pacific region. Now, 60% of the world's 8 billion people live here in this region. And it's a region that is really, truly bursting with both a wealth of experience and untapped potential. And there's a lot of reasons why we should celebrate, right? People are healthier, they're living longer, they enjoy more rights, more choices than ever before. Look at maternal mortality in the region. It's dropped by 67% since 2000. These are fantastic achievements. But of course, we know that inequalities still remain in this region as in others, and particularly when it comes to gender disparities. Climate change, pandemics, they're compounding the vulnerabilities of women and girls. And here in Asia and the Pacific, it's, the world's most climate disaster prone region in the world. So we have to look at many of these issues through that lens. Also here in Asia Pacific, it's a region that's undergoing huge demographic transitions. So by that, I mean, you have population aging, you have societies with low fertility, you have huge migration patterns, growing urbanization. In some areas of the region, fertility rates are as low as 1 child per woman. So there are many dimensions to the forces that, prevent women and girls from fully exercising their rights and choices, and particularly when it comes to making decisions about their bodies. And by that, I mean, such as whether to have children. And if she does decide to have children, When is she going to have them? How many is she going to have? With whom is she going to have those children? And so at the root of these disparities is gender discrimination. And it's a gender discrimination that is reflected and has been sustained, like I said earlier, by patriarchal systems of power, and that spawns gender inequality and disempowerment. And, you know, where you have social norms that are gender discriminatory, then top of the list who suffer are women and girls. And women and girls, their bodies can then be subject to choices that are not made by them, but made by others. Should it be an intimate partner or should it be a legislator? That's wrong. Full stop. Women should be in charge of their own bodies. Girls should be in charge of their own bodies. Full bodily autonomy for women and girls is what we're advocating for. And so, you know, these harmful norms and practices that, you know, can lead women and girls to be stripped of their rights to decide whether or not to use a contraceptive to prevent unintended pregnancy, or whether it places them subject to harmful practices such as, you know, female genital mutilation or child marriage, or even the denial of access to life-saving maternal and reproductive health care and services. You know, I travel all over the region, and in many places I've visited, there have been cases when, you know, pregnant women have told me about their struggle to find a midwife, or I've met young girls who are being married off as child brides. You know, in this region, you know, look at the number of out of school children, adolescents and youth. It's decreased by about 8 million or so here in the Asia Pacific region between 2015 and 2019. But the region is still home to 50% of the world's out of school population. And many of those, especially girls, they don't successfully complete secondary education. Look also at digital skills and literacy. We all agree these are essential for everyday life, especially for, you know, creating employment opportunities. However, women and girls, they're less likely to have access to technology or to use the internet or to own a smartphone compared to men. For example, you know, in South Asia, the mobile ownership rate for women is 65%. Compare that to the 88% of men who own a smartphone. So these kind of, you know, disparities, they exacerbate women and girls' social exclusion, and that's where you see, you know, the digital divide becoming a gender digital divide. So we want to address this gender discrimination at its core by engaging with communities, by speaking to individuals to break harmful social norms and practices, and to promote policies and practices that are gender equitable, that empower women and girls to fully exercise their rights and their choices. And here in the region, what I'm working on, along with all my you know, fantastic colleagues across the region, is about building partnerships. Regional collaboration is key. And, you know, in the Asia Pacific region, we have an enormous advantage, given the new technological advances, the promising innovations that we see, that can offer an enabling environment for solutions that can go to scale. And if they go to scale, then we have a chance at addressing some of these very complex challenges. And, you know, the partnerships take all shapes and sizes. We want to work with public-private partnerships, for example. They're crucial for knowledge and experience sharing, for building the capacity, building institutions, and getting a long-lasting impact in the region. And if we do that, then we can really unlock economic growth, because we're making informed investments, and investments that are looking also at the sexual and reproductive rights of women and girls. And that is crucial if you want to have long-lasting impact in terms of your socioeconomic development, and if you want to create growth for generations to come.
After listening to you talk about this topic and other speakers that have been on our podcast series, I have really been impacted by what's been going on in building awareness of what UNFPA has been working on. But for yourself, when you are immersed in this type of work, can you tell us a little bit about how it has impacted your own life? What does women's rights and choices mean to you as a husband and a father?
Okay, thank you for that question. We're all shaped, aren't we, by our upbringing, by our background, and by what's going on in our personal life as well. And I come from a family of 11 children in Ireland, and always had a passion for the social issues, for issues around peace and human rights and development. But if I think back to what has shaped me, I owe a great deal of gratitude to my parents. We had an amazing upbringing. It was in many respects very simple, very basic, very working class, but it was a house full of love, full of laughter, full of sharing and storytelling. Um, there was no money necessarily, but you didn't know that you were lacking for anything because you had all of that. But what there was rules. And one of those was a very simple rule, which was about, treating others as you would wish to be treated yourself. And that's all about respect. That's about listening to each other. That's about, not casting judgment or aspersions on anyone. And that simple rule that has in many ways guided me through life, I've come to learn, it's what also unites many different religions across the world, many different cultures. In fact, I would say it's actually, the central pillar of what the United Nations is about, which is probably why, in many respects, I've been shaped towards the United Nations career that I've had. And, I feel really lucky to work at an agency such as UNFPA, that is looking at the sexual and reproductive health and rights for women, because I really do believe in these issues. For me, women's rights, that means that you are empowered. You have the space to make informed decisions from childhood to adulthood, that you're going to have a lifelong impact for your life, for your family, for your own health, for your future. And I've learned that not just because of UNFPA, but I've learned that also from my own mother, from my sisters. I've been, blessed by the influence that they've had on my life, but also, I think to many of the female bosses that I've had throughout my career, I've learned a lot from them, and that has helped to shape my outlook. And now, as a father, I always educate my children along these lines. We have three daughters, and we talk to them a lot about gender equality, the disparities around women's empowerment. But we also talk to them about healthy relationships, about knowing their own bodies, about sexuality education, but all within the cone of being open with their parents and being in a very trusted relationship with their parents, where they have a safe space to, because we're all young, we all make mistakes, and we all need to feel free to ask questions. Equally, we have one son. What is the phrase they say? Blessed art thou among women. So, one son, and he's got three
Oh
sisters.
my goodness.
And we talked to
I was
him
just
a
gonna
lot
say,
about.
yeah, that's very interesting. Three
Yeah, so
girls and one boy.
but equally, we talked to him a lot about respect, and about even in simple things, should it be in sport, that there should be no gender divide or disparity when it comes to issues such as that. And I think also it's when you look at to your question around these women's rights and choices, and what it has meant to me, I would say, as a husband, as a father, it's all about equal partnership, right? It's about each of us playing to our strengths, but you have to want to understand the other. because not everything comes natural. And I think that's okay to say that. But you do have to be open to learn and to especially learn from your mistakes, and to be shaped by some of these disparities. And that also speaks to, the need for young parents to juggle their careers in an equal way. And both my wife and I, we've benefited from maternity and paternity leave. I have to tell you, it's one of the most enriching things I've ever experienced in my life, to have that dedicated time with the children. And then maybe just as a final point, if I could speak to my upbringing. I grew up in Northern Ireland, and I grew up during a time of the Troubles, when there was a lot of hurt among communities. There was a lot of death and injury. There was a lot of mistrust. And what I saw is that women were not involved in the peace process at the early stages as much as they should have been. In some respects, it was tokenistic, which I think was to the detriment of the peace process, because women, they are the fabric of community. And I see that across the world, not just where I grew up in Northern Ireland. And, it is women who at the community level can help to rebuild trust, to restore respect, to help begin conversations that look at reconciliation and build pathways forward in such difficult settings. And, that has also greatly shaped my own sense of justice, and in particular, the need for all of us, men and women, boys and girls, no matter what the issue is, that we all need to be sitting down around the table and figuring out what these solutions need to be, but doing it with a proper understanding and accessibility to the experience of others.
I think it's amazing, in terms of what we've gained from your story. And that is, Women's Day is an important day, not for women, but for everyone around the world. Because as you said, women are a crucial part of the fabric of our community, our society around the world, and therefore we need to celebrate it. So the global theme for International Women's Day is to invest in women, accelerate progress. This is very much in line with what we've been speaking about today with Redesigning the World and Equity 2030 Alliance. What can our listeners, people who are listening right now, do to redesign the world at an individual level? I know the task seems quite massive, but what can everyone do in their own, life to contribute to this?
Yeah, great question. In a time and age where technology and science have the real power to shape our future for the better, for the good, we need to ensure that women and girls in all their diversity are actively included in the design and the development of solutions. Communities, countries, they can only flourish when all women and girls are empowered and when they have access to gender equitable services, particularly in healthcare and education. So what can we do? Great question. And I know that this can sound very overwhelming. So let me start with, we all need to educate ourselves. We need to learn about the unique challenges and experiences that are faced by women in different spheres of life, including workplace discrimination, gender-based violence, and lack of representation in leadership positions. I would encourage all of our listeners today, challenge gender stereotypes, challenge and confront those gender stereotypes and biases that you see in everyday conversations and interactions, both personally and professionally, so that we can promote gender equality and inclusivity. And that's tough. It takes somebody to take the first step. Often you can lose, you can lose friends along the way sometimes because people don't like to look at some of these issues in such a blunt manner. But that's what's required, these difficult conversations. For those that are in the policy space, you need to advocate for more policy change. We need to advocate for policies and legislation that promotes gender equality, that addresses systemic barriers, that ensures that women's rights and girls' rights are protected in areas such as healthcare, education, employment, and also, very importantly, political representation. All of us, no matter who we are, no matter where we sit, we have to amplify the voices of women and girls. We need to use the platforms that we have. We need to influence and amplify the voices and the achievements of women and girls so that we promote their leadership and their representation in decision-making processes. If we do that, then we help create opportunities for their stories and their perspectives to be heard and valued. And that is an enormous benefit as we try and create policies that are equitable. Every individual can make a difference in their own way. And it's when each of us is working together with a common goal that we can really design the world to be more equitable, more accessible, more inclusive. And wherever you are, wherever your place of work or your place of living and growing up is, don't forget the most vulnerable. Should that be an elderly person, a person with a disability, someone who is struggling with mental health, someone who enjoys gender diversity, no matter what it is, don't forget the most vulnerable, because in as much as this is all about women and girls, we have to really also focus on those who are left behind and being left behind by some of these continued gender disparities. So that's my encouragement to all of our listeners. And I'm sure that if we continue to move in lockstep together, that we'll continue to see fantastic advances in these areas, not only here in Asia Pacific, but across the world.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you so much for enlightening us with the issues surrounding what needs to be progressing with women's rights, especially the Equity 2030 Alliance. And lastly, most importantly, thank you for inspiring us to make a difference for the International Women's Day this year.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to speak to you, and happy International Women's Day to all of us.
This has been the latest episode of Hold On a Minute by UNFPA Asia Pacific. We hope you have been inspired as we celebrate International Women's Day to join us in redesigning the world for women. For more insightful episodes of Hold On a Minute by UNFPA Asia Pacific, follow our podcast pages on Spotify, Facebook, YouTube, and Apple Podcast. Just search for UNFPA Hold On a Minute.